Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room, and your host for the next 50 minutes or so, Pastor Mark here at the Lighthouse, getting comfortable in the chair here. I want to talk to you about a couple of things that are relative to Scripture based on the book of Enoch. Now, I know that this is a difficult thing for a lot of you to hear, but I want to use the book of Enoch tonight to show you some things that are in Scripture that we read and take for granted, which is really finite. In other words, there's not a lot of information on it. And when I do this, you will find that there will be kind of a light go on, if you will, when you hear it. We're going to be talking about the archangels, how many of them, especially. We only know of three, basically, in the Bible as we know it: Gabriel, Michael, and Lucifer. And Lucifer is a fallen angel, as you know, and he's the author of all the things that are gross and bad. But on top of that, I shared with you last week the connection between chapter 82 of Psalms and the book of Enoch in regards to chapter 12, explaining more of what actually took place to that group I called the Council of God. Now, in that thought process tonight, we're going to look at some things that are even more interesting and even more to the point. In chapter 30, if you want to, I'll give you a second here to grab your pen and pencil. I want you to take a look at a couple of things, and you can read for yourself in the next few days. You take time to do that. I know that a lot of you that are running this through and then running it back and running it through to catch what I'm saying. So I'll try to do this slowly tonight so that you get that. Now, this is very interesting in the fact, talking about God's earthly counsel, or maybe it'd probably be more to the point. It was gods that had been appointed by Yahweh, by the Most High. And what he did in appointing these gods, he pointed them over geographical areas across the world. How did that happen? Well, as you recall our discussion from Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9, it talks about the number of nations disinherited by Yahweh, or disinherited by the Most High God, and at the Tower of Babel. Now, understanding this is incredibly important for you to be able to tell what's actually transpiring in regards to when God is dealing with some of these things that are going on. Because we're going to talk about in a moment, I'm going to jump into the book of Enoch, and I'm going to explain to you archangels. We're going to look at it and give some commentary on that. And then we're going to talk next about the hell, basically. The term that's being used is called Sheol and Tartarus. Okay, and what you'll find is there's a correlation between one of the angels, the archangels that God was using, was over to Tartarus. Now I say to Tartarus, it's a Greek term, which means that Sheol and Tartarus are actually the same thing, but different parts of it. In other words, hell, we have in the English, is over one whole area. This explains it in greater detail and kind of breaks it down. It's really quite fascinating. Now, and in the disinherited number of nations were 70. There were 70 different nations that were, if you will, disinherited from God's purview, in which he took separate Elohim. Elohim means God or gods, and it would be eternal. These are eternal, really never-ending lives. They should be alive forever. We found out in chapter 82 of Psalms that there was because of what they did on the planet, in other words, when they came down and were being worshipped by the people, and they weren't refusing it, they were not pointing them to the Most High God. What they were doing is they were receiving that worship, and then they also went down and had relations with earthly women, or what we would call humans. And so it was very ugly what was going on, and this is one of the things that he commanded the other nations and their gods, other gods that served him, and he's making a big deal about this. Now, we'll take this a step further tonight. I think at least we can. I want to be able to explain to you how this actually works. There were 70 elders that were taken from a larger group, which was called Yahweh's council, or God's council. And they were given different ranks and different tasks. In other words, they had hierarchy. There were things that they could do. They had autonomy, which they could do things supernaturally. I know that sounds weird, but the fact is that God was not the only one that had supernatural powers. These gods also had supernatural powers of one kind or another. Not to the point of being able to create, but they could manipulate, if you will. This is one of the reasons why we see in Scripture where it says that the enemy is an angel of light, and which means he simulates or can look like God, but is not God. So I say that tongue-in-cheek because we're going to be talking about some of that tonight. Now, not every member of the divine council had equal rank. The sons of God with authority over the nations had been assigned that role by God. So his permission could be revoked of these gods, if you will, that were over these nations. Why does he not do that now? Good question. That's a question I'd love to, if I could have a council with God, I'd like to be able to ask him that question. Why don't you just revoke their power so that over the geographical area of Ventura and Ojai and in Tri-Counties, which many people believe that there is a deity over this area, which I believe as well, maybe not to the extent that they do where it's finite, but I believe that there is a deity that is over this region, which is an unholy God or a dark side, if you will, or the Darth Vader, if you will, of the kingdom, if you will. The thought that I'm trying to get across is that the correspondence with these deities, and I say deities loosely, they're created and they can be uncreated. In other words, God can kill them. In other words, they can be destroyed. God cannot be destroyed. Why can't he be destroyed? Because he's always been. He's from the beginning and from the end. He has no beginning, no ending. In other words, he's always been there. And so we find this with the 70 nations, and I'm saying all of that because I want to begin to talk to you about some of the areas in which I feel very strongly in how people interact with what's going on the planet. In other words, the dark side, and how they enter in, and how evil is perpetrated within the framework of the world or the framework of what we know as, for instance, Oakview or Ventura County or the Tri-Counties, Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles type, or in that kind of arrangement. What I'm saying is that these deities have power over geographical areas. Ours happens to be very focused in that one area that we know as the vortex, or the place where the north-south, east-west valley comes together. And it's up in a gorge, and this is where we saw a lot of the stuff that was going on. Now, it's interesting also that in this role of these 70 deities that are over these geographical areas, that we also see that the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish way that they did their leadership structure, the Sanhedrin was led by a high priest and a number of 70 individuals. Now, I know that this sounds really weird, but see, everything that we see in the real world or in the earthly realm, the counsel of God, has an effect on it. So the 70 elders or 70 deity that are over the world, that are geographically assigned, that are over each of these nations and etc. It just goes to prove that there is so much more going on that it's impossible for us to not talk about it without pulling in more information to be able to understand it. For instance, when we talk about the archangels, we wonder, okay, so what was Michael's job, for instance? Let's just say that, for instance, Michael's job. We know that he's a warrior. We know that he was very powerful, and he had things that he had to do. And God lack of a better term, gave him direction on how to do those things. Gabriel. Another situation, Gabriel was the announcement of Jesus' birth. He was a messenger in a lot of different ways as an archangel, but did he have a job? Did he have a supernatural job that he needed to do, which he has? But now there are some other ones that have come to light that I want to talk about tonight in a little better detail when I read it out of the, if you will, the book of Enoch. Now, again, I don't want you to think that I'm not speaking truth. What I want you to understand is that the book of Enoch is a very, very, very old piece of literature. There are some things that maybe you don't realize, and I'm going to try to explain them tonight, that prove that the book of Enoch was written in like the first 100 years, 150 BC, that kind of thing. It's very old. And because there's a term, they call it a Qumran, Q-U-M-U-N. And it was a piece of literature that was found in the Mesopotamian area that was found in one of the caves. It's numbered as a cave. It has a cave number. I'll try to find it for you when I get over there. And it basically identified and then confirmed the book of Enoch as being genuine in that regard. Now, was it ever canon? No. Was the book of Enoch important? Yes. Every Jew knew the book of Enoch. All of the books of, well, in particular the Hebrew side. And I don't know if I can clarify that in a better way, because the Hebrew ones are numbered differently than the first book of Enoch. And what we're going to be looking at tonight, we're going to be looking, I think, at chapter 22, and then we're going to look at chapter 89, and we're going to talk about the archangels, which I think is 85. But why am I saying that? Is because I want to share with you the connection between Old and New Testament, and the book of Enoch and Old Testament. And why is that important? It's because it just proves that the Bible is very real, written long before this other book ever came to light, or in some cases, depending on which one it is, like the Babylonian one, was actually written long before Moses wrote what we know now as the Pentateuch, of the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, saying all of that to say this is that some of the things that we see here, this dominion of lesser gods, in the wake of Yahweh's judgment on them in chapter 82 of Psalms, he's talking about making them become flesh and blood and die like men, and several things that are kind of frightening, to be honest with you, if you think about it. And that's what makes people freak out about the book of Enoch. But using the book of Enoch as a reference source to enhance what you read in Old Testament makes it very valuable, at least in my opinion. Now, in Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, there's some place that you can read. This is talking about the Tower of Babel situation, talking about the 70 languages and basically the deity that was put over the 70 geographical areas, as I said. And then in Isaiah 24, 23, this is what it says. And he's, again, talking about some of the things that's going to happen to these who clearly, how can I say it, did exactly what God told them not to do. This is chapter 24 of Isaiah, verse 21. He says, "On that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on earth." And then jump down to 23. "Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders." This is Isaiah 24, 21, and 23 from the ESV. That's the English Standard Version. The setting makes sense that the divine council seen in Revelations 4 and 5, where the 24 elders surround God's throne, you can read that again in Revelation 4 and 5. The 24 elders are around the throne of God, and they're crying, "Holy, holy, holy," and all of that. And the teaching point is profound. The corruption of the sons of God who currently dominate the nations will be replaced by loyal members of God's family. But which family? And the New Testament begins to explain that, who the family is. Since the church, the corporate body of believers, inherited the promises given to Abraham, we find that in Galatians 3, 26, 27, 28, and 29. Let me read that again. Galatians 3, 26, 27, 28, and 29. The believers are the true Israel the New Testament talks about. We will inherit the rule of the nations with Jesus at the end of days. Revelations 3:21. And what it means is that we will displace the corrupted divine sons of God presently ruling the nations who are under judgment, Psalms 82, who are already but not yet Yahweh's new counsel on earth. That's you and me. That's those that he will choose to rule the nations. And John 1:12 goes on to say this, but as many received him, to those who believe in his name, he gave them authority to become the children of God. That's you and me. And he says, so what sort of love has the Father given to us that we should be called children of God as we are? That's 1 John 3:1. This structuring helps us make sense of something else Paul said. The rulership of the nations was higher ranking task than being a messenger, in other words, a malek or angel. The destiny of believers will be to share with Jesus' throne and rule the nations is a backdrop, or is what is being said in the statement that Christians should stop letting the world's courts resolve their disputes. In 1 Corinthians 6:3, he protests, do you not know that we will judge angels when we are made divine or glorified on the new earth, and we will outrank angels? It will be one of God's once and future family, once the future council, once the future rulers with Jesus over all the nations. Israel's release propels this theology. The glorified divine aspect of Yahweh's human family, that's you and me, our human family, this council is described or in other ways. We find it in Isaiah 14:3. This is imaging of Joseph's dream. We see Jacob and Israel are stars in Genesis 37:9. None of this is accidents. He's talking about stars. He's talking about nations. He's talking about rulership. He's talking about being co-rulers with Jesus. Now, I don't know about you. Kind of sounds like fun. But what do I know? So all of that being said, tonight I'm going to take you to and identify some of the star language and some of this other stuff that I think is fascinating. And the more that we learn about it, the better. Now, I'm going to be taking you to our first stop in the book of Enoch. Will be chapter 20 of the book of Enoch. Here we're talking about the function of the 7 archangels. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's an interaction between the angels and certain angels and Enoch. In other words, we're going to be talking about some things that are really quite fascinating, I think. And he's talking about. There's a place here where it talks about the final place of punishment for the fallen angels, which are called, let me use this term, stars. They're called stars. We find that in Revelations, stars. These are beings that are considered Elohim or gods. Now, here we're talking about archangels. Now, what's interesting about this is that we know of 3. We know Lucifer, we know Gabriel, we know Michael. Here in the book of Enoch in chapter 20, there are exactly 7, which would make sense because in Jewish theology, 7 is the number of perfection. 7 always revolves around and is talking to deity, okay? So let me read this, very short, only 8 verses. And we're going to see what some of these are done, and then we're going to talk about them a little bit. Now, these are the names and the ones that they call watchers that we have been talking about. Remember I told you about watchers a couple of weeks ago. And this is verse 1 of chapter 20 of the book of Enoch. Now, the one before that is talking about a conversation that Enoch is having in chapter 19 with Uriel, Uriel, one of the archangels. Uriel said to me, he said in verse 19, chapter 19, verse 1, here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Here shall they stand till the day of the great judgment, in which they will be judged till they are made to an end of. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. And I, Enoch, alone saw the vision. The end of all things no man shall see as I have seen. Now he's talking about something, so it's a precursor. He's talking about this is something that's going to happen. These are these deities that went down and had relations. They're going to be judged. Chapter 20 then begins to explain who are the archangels and what are their jobs. Now, I know this might be a little bit redundant, and then we're going to get into Sheol and the underworld, but I want you to listen carefully about Tartarus. Remember I told you about that? And several other things. So listen carefully what I'm about to say. Chapter 20, verse 1, names and functions of the 7 archangels. And these are the names of the holy angels who watch. Uriel, the one I just talked about that is having a conversation with Enoch, one of the holy angels who is over the world and over Tartarus, which is hell. Raphael, one of the holy angels who is over the spirits of men. Now, that's an interesting one. Spirits of men, humans. Rachiel, one of the holy angels, takes vengeance. It's different. There was Raphael, and this is Raquel, Raguel. The one previous was Raphael. One of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Then you have Michael. We know him. One of the holy angels, to wit, he is set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. So in other words, he keeps order on the earth. And we know that because what did he do when Joshua was fighting? And he showed up on the scene carrying a very large sword. And Joshua asked him, basically, he said, who are you for, them or us? And he began to raise his sword, and he said, neither. I am the Lord of hosts. So here we see that. It's very interesting. And then he's set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. Then there's Saraquel, Saraquael, one of the holy angels who's set over the spirits who sin in the spirit. So that's interesting. I've never heard of that one before. That's very interesting. He is set over the spirits who sin in the spirit. And then we have another familiar face, if you will, Gabriel, one of the holy angels who's over paradise and the serpents and the cherubim. In other words, he's over all the angels. Gabriel is head angel. And then Remiel, Remiel, one of the holy angels whom God set over those who rise. So that brings us to a point. There's 7 different angels here, each having a different job. We know Michael, we know Gabriel. These others we've never heard of. Uriel, I think it's mentioned one time in the Old Testament, but is a fascinating guy all on his own because he's a watcher. And these are the ones that go and they watch the world and then go back to the throne room where God is, as if God doesn't already know, and then reports to him what's going on the earth. Very fascinating. This is fascinating stuff anyway. Now, Uriel is talking again in chapter 21 and talking about the final punishment of the fallen angels, which is his job. Uriel is what? Holy angels who's over the world and over hell. So he would be part of punishment. Now, dropping down to chapter 22, I find this fascinating. Talking about the underworld, I'm going to be using some interesting things, and we're going to be talking about them. And I want you to understand that, remember, much of what you read in the book of Enoch is symbols and signs. similar to Revelations. When they talk about an animal or they talk about certain kinds of animals, bulls in particular, which are always used for sacrifice, there's a reason for that. There's things that are being said. Now, in this, chapter 22, verse 1, begins to talk about the underworld, or talk about Sheol, hell. And thence I went to another place, the mountain and of hard rock, and there was, and this is not where they play music, I'm just saying, and there was on it 4 hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. How smooth are the hollow places and deep and dark to look at? Then Raphael, one of the archangels, answered and said, one of the holy angels who was with me said unto me, these hollow places have been created for this very purpose, that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble therein. Yea, that the souls of the children of men should assemble here. And these places have been made to receive them till the day of their judgment, until their appointed period, till the period appointed, until the great judgment comes upon them. I saw the spirit of a dead man making suit, and with his voice went forth to heaven to make made suit. And I asked Raphael, the angel who was with me, and I said to him, this spirit which maketh suit, who is it? The voice goeth forth to make suit to heaven. In other words, make a plea to God. And he answered him, saying, this is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. He makes his suit against him till his seed is destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from amongst the seed of men. Then I asked regarding it, and regarding the hollow places, why is one separated from the other? And he answered me and said to me, these 3 have been made that the spirits of the dead might be separated, and such division been made for the spirits of righteousness, in which there will be a bright spring of water, and such has been made for sinners when they die, that are buried in the earth in judgment, not to be executed on them in their lifetime. Here the spirits will be set apart in this great pain, P-A-I-N, till the great day of judgment, and the punishment and torment of those who have cursed forever, and retribution for their spirits. There he shall bind them forever, and such a division has been made for the spirits of those who make their suit, who make disclosures concerning their destruction, when they were slain in the days of the sinners. Such has been made for the spirits of men who were not righteous but sinners, who were complete in transgression, and of the transgressors that shall be companions, but their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be raised from thence. I blessed the Lord of glories, and said, blessed be my Lord, the Lord of righteousness, who ruleth forever. So what he's doing, he's talking about what's going to happen to those that have died. There's a separation. Those that are righteous are going to be over here, spring of water, which means life. And then over here on this other side will be death and destruction. All of that being said, takes us to another very end. Now, this is the book of Enoch, chapter 22. Now, I'm going to take you to another place, and I want to just share with you what I find, which I think is really quite interesting, and then we're probably going to run out of time. Now, this is why I want to share with you the parts of the book of Enoch, because there's stuff in here that is in the Old Testament. One in particular, Noah. And it's interesting that this particular portion, if you will, is going to have some disclosure about what happens, and you can see that it's talking about a flood of one kind or another. Now, before we get to chapter 89, let's take a look just for a moment at chapter 87 and 88. Now, first chapter 87, it talks about the advent of the 7 archangels. Advent meaning they're rising. And there's some very interesting things that are being said. He's talking about, in the book of Enoch, he's talking about animals in here. Now, is he talking about animals, or is he talking about people, or is he talking about societies, or what? It's just very interesting that all of these things have representation in humankind, and it's very, very interesting. Now, again, I saw those who began to gore each other and devour each other, and the earth, and they began to cry out loud. And I raised mine eyes again to heaven, and I saw the vision. Behold, there came forth from the heaven beings who were like white men, and went forth from that place, and 3 with them. And those 3 that had last come forth grasped me by my hand, took me up away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a lofty place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. And one of them said to me, Remain here, thou seest everything that befalls those, listen carefully, elephants, camels, and asses, and the stars, and the oxen, and all of them. Now remember, we just saw that the stars were these gods. They were considered stars. So that is a reference to the 7 archangels and what they were doing, which takes me over to chapter 89, in which I want to only read to you 9 verses, because it talks about the flood and Noah and the deliverance of Noah. Now, this is what the term is called. They call the deluge and the deliverance of Noah. This is fascinating stuff. And one of those 4 went to that white bull and instructed him in secret without his being terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel and dwelt thereon. The 3 bulls went with him in that vessel, and they were covered in. Well, it's 3 sons. So the bull, Noah, and his 3 sons, who were also bulls. And again I raised my eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into the enclosure. And as I saw again, behold, fountains were opened on the surface of the great enclosure, and all the water began to swell and rise to the surface. And I saw the enclosure till all of its surface was covered with water, and the water and the darkness was mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of the water, and the water had risen above the height of the enclosure, and it's streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. So basically, he's talking about the world. And this water was coming up and covering everything in the world. So the earth was now covered. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until they saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in the water, which is basically all of mankind, all the animals, everything. But the vessel floated on the water, while the oxen and the elephants and the camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank to the depths. And again I saw the vision till those water torrents were removed from the high roof, and the chasms and the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. And when the water began to run down into these, till the earth became visible, and the vessels settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, the light appeared, but that white bull, which had become a man, became out of the vessel, and the 3 bulls with him, and one of those 3 was like white like the bull, and one of them was red as blood, and the other black, and that was a white bull departed from them. And it is said, and I just read you 9 verses. Now, does this not sound like Noah and the ark? This does not sound like what we read in Genesis. But what's interesting is that the blood, the black, the white, the red as blood, one was black, one was white, departed from them. In other words, these are showing us that there is 3 separate individuals that had different giftings, and each one of them did what they did when they came out of the ark and then began to multiply and begin to have fill the earth again. This is one of the things that I find so fascinating about the book of Enoch. There is always a reflection back to the book as we know it, called the Bible. And what's fascinating about it is that we can now find proof in another place, meaning the book of Enoch, that we see that. Now, number 1, the first book of Enoch is the Ethiopian book of Enoch. That's what we're reading from. The second book of Enoch is the Slavic secrets of Enoch. Most of those are dreams and that type of thing. We're going to talk about those next week because there are some things in there that are very fascinating where they talk about taking on to the promised land and moving the people of God in there. And it's fascinating that it's talking about it in the book of Enoch. We see very little in regards to the journeys that the people of God had, with the exception of a couple of books of the Old Testament. And then finally, there's the Hebrew book of Enoch, which every Jew knew. Every Jew knew everything about that. Now, and to me, that alone is fascinating. That all that I've been talking about to this point is reinforcing the Bible. In other words, I'm not using the book of Enoch as a proof, but a supplement to the Bible to give you an idea that it's bigger than what you think it is, and much more important than what you think it is. And I think that's, to me, is one of the most fascinating things that I find, especially when it comes to understanding the supernatural, is what we've been trying to do. Understanding what God has set in motion, understanding his covering of the earth with all of these gods, sons of God, if you will. And these sons of God were deity. They were part of God's counsel, supposedly to keep everything in order, which went horribly wrong while God was dealing with his people, the Jews, his remnant, his chosen ones. All of these other gods went stupid, and they started doing things that they weren't supposed to do, like, again, being associated with women on the planet and generating what we call the giants, of which we talked about this last Sunday. I think that was a fascinating statement when you look at Deuteronomy and you're talking about what took place when Moses took the people into this, what they call the east of Canaan, and they went in there and had that little war, and that the one king, had a bed that was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Now, I don't know about you, I like big beds, but they made this bed because he was so big they needed something that he could lie on and not have his feet hanging over. Fascinating stuff. So, as I said, all of that to say this, is that the supernatural is bigger than what you think. The proof of the supernatural we find in the book of Enoch is proving that the stories that we read in the Bible are not only true, factual, and real, but they actually happened. And that's probably one of the things that makes people so nervous, and it's one of the reasons why the enemy is trying so hard to eradicate people of faith, the reading of the Bible in our schools. If we would have not taken prayer out of schools, and we would have not taken the Bible out of schools, we would not be in the place that we are today. Because I got news for you. There's a lot going on that we don't understand, and a lot that we need to understand, especially when it comes to the things that God is trying to share with us. We need to be careful not to allow ourselves to be sucked into what's being done. Please do yourself a favor. Don't believe anything that you're seeing with what the Democrats are trying to sell you. And what they're trying to sell you is not a good thing. And be careful, because life is not going to be like they say they're going to make it. They're not going to give away the farm. We can't afford to do that. And the same thing is true of this. The book of Enoch is a good resource, but it is not the Word of God. The Word of God is the Word. That is what we rely on. That's where we put all of our faith and truth in. The book of Enoch reinforces what we've read with more information to just enhance and grow our faith in regards to what that means. I'm excited about that. And you need to just continue to ask people to come to service, to be part of a church, and be part of our body and part of our community. And I just heard some amazing things tonight about some people who came and talked to me after a Bible study tonight, and I was just amazed by it. So I want to say to you, those of you that are out there, those of you that are watching, keep the faith, man. Stay focused. Stay on top of it. Know your limitations. Know what you know. And what you don't know, ask questions about. Because the day is coming, believe me, the day is coming when there's going to be a lot of people asking you for help, and you need to be ready to give that answer without any hesitation. Tell them the truth. Don't tell them a lie. Don't tell them what you think you know. Don't say, oh, Pastor Mark thinks this. No, you tell them what you know. You tell them exactly what's going on in your life, what's strengthening your life, and then share that little tiny 30-second blip of your story. Jesus did this for me. And I got news for you. When you do that, God will show you amazing grace. So may God bless you. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May his light shine upon you. Wherever you go and whatever you do, leave a blessing. Leave a legacy, because God knows your name. See you next week from Lighthouse Living Room. Hope you enjoyed tonight. This was fun. See you next week.